Well, hello again. It's me again. Imagine that. And as promised, this is part 2 of my welcome video. And in this video, I'm going to just very briefly talk about our readings for week 1 so that I can hopefully help you develop a better understanding. So the first one is Ethos, Logos, and Pathos. And you'll see a picture there if you're following along with me on the sheet of the same title in course documents. So you go to content up at the top, course documents on this left-hand sidebar, Ethos, Logos, Pathos, right? You'll see a picture of Aristotle. And it sort of reminds me of my husband's comb-over days, you know, because he was going bald. My dad used to say, Charlie, the Lord was good to you. He gave you one face and cleared off a place for another one. So I think maybe Aristotle had the come-over thing going on as well, but you probably know about him a little bit. He was a very, very famous Greek thinker, and he taught at Plato's Academy, and he actually came up with the ideas that are inherent now in our study of what is called rhetoric. And I promised you in my last video that we were going to talk more about that. So these ideas right here in Ethos, Logos, and Pathos, the sheet, they're fundamental to English 1010. They're super important to understand, and we're going to talk a lot about them through the class. So what is rhetoric? What is that word? It's defined as the art of effective or persuasive communication, right? So it might be through the spoken word. It might be through the written word, like what we're going to be doing. It might be through visual mediums. And so when you hear that word rhetoric, I want you to think of 2 words that mean the very same thing as rhetoric. Effective communication, all right? Engrave it in gold letters on your brain. Rhetoric equals effective communication. If we were in the classroom right now, I'd be making you say that out loud like 3 or 4 times. So effective communication through writing, through speaking, and through visual mediums. So now think about it. You're driving down the interstate and you see a sign for a Cracker Barrel restaurant, an old country store. That's rhetoric. That sign is trying to say to you, friends, you don't want to go to McDonald's. You don't want to go to Burger King. No. You want to come to the Cracker Barrel where you can get good country cooking from sweet people who call you honey and just really love you. And you want to go to our gift store where you can buy all kinds of cool stuff, right? That's rhetoric. And if you think about it, whatever you decide to wear when you go out, that's your visual rhetoric. You're sending a message out to the world. So there are some days when you might be thinking, I don't want to draw any attention to myself today. I'm just going to wear something sort of plain and nondescript. There may be other times when you really want to send a message. Maybe you have a t-shirt with a message that you want the world to see. I had a friend that I went to grad school with, and now she's the composition director at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And she looked really young, at the time that I knew her, but she was much younger, but she had a lot of piercings, she had tattoos, she had her hair dyed like pink and blue, and when she would come walking into the classroom to teach a class, students would be like, what? You're the instructor? You don't look like our idea of what an instructor should look like. But this was her rhetoric. This was her way of presenting herself to the world, of saying to people, hey, I'm not your typical professor. I'm a little bit different, right? So that's rhetoric as well. So Aristotle said, guess what? Every single communication ever in the history of the world is essentially three-sided. It's a trilateral relationship, right? It's got 3 sides. And each point of the triangle influences the other 2. And so you've got logos, you've got ethos, and you've got pathos. That's your rhetorical triangle. And so if you want a successful communication, You need a little bit of all three of these things. And so each point of the triangle bears some responsibility for the success of your communication. So think about that. If I'm speaking to you and what I'm saying to you seems very logical, but I have no emotion, I have no pathos, and I'm just sort of right? You might not pay attention. If I have lots of emotion, but what I'm saying just doesn't make common sense to you, it's just not logical, then you're not going to pay attention. If I have logic and I have an emotion about it, I'm passionate about it, but I am not very truthful or trustworthy or honest, then you're not going to pay attention. That's ethos. So you need all three of those appeals to make a successful communication in writing and speaking and whatever. And all of this is influenced by context, right? So context is like an atmosphere that surrounds every communication. So that refers to when in history did this communication happen? What was going on in that place at that moment in time? What was the mindset like for those people? What were the norms like in that society? So here's a great example. If I had stood up in Birmingham, Alabama in 1850, during the height of slavery before the Civil War, and I had pronounced all people, regardless of skin color, should be treated equally because slavery is wrong and you guys need to get with the program, what would happen to me? Right? Would not be pretty. If I had stood up in Birmingham, Alabama in 1950, before the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s, and made the same pronouncement, wouldn't be good, you know? But hopefully now, if I stood up and made that pronouncement, the majority of people would say, you go girl, you are absolutely right. So a lot of this is influenced by what's happening in that time and place. So logos, facts, case studies, data, logical reasoning, citing the experts. Ethos, you want to be trustworthy, credible, reliable. You want to have manner of delivery, Aristotle said. So in other words, you address your opposition, people who would disagree with you, with respect. You don't degrade them. And then pathos, that emotional appeal. So you can appeal to the higher emotions of love and empathy, a belief in fairness, or the lower emotions of greed and lust and revenge, right? And I give you a couple of examples of those, and hopefully you're going to appeal to the higher emotion. Remember, too, that an absence of ethos and logos or pathos, any one of the three, gives us something to think and write about. So, for example, why might one of these appeals be absent in a text, in a reading that we're looking at? And what effect does that have on the overall success of the writer's argument or thought process? So, I give you an example here. If I'm speaking before a group of scientists, they're very logical. They're all about the evidence, right? And I use a logos appeal, logic. And I'm heavy on the logos and much lighter on the emotion. That's probably a good choice because of my audience. However, if I'm speaking to a group of people like me who are creative writers, songwriters, dreamers, poets, you know, then I might be heavier on the emotional appeal and a little bit lighter on the logical appeal. Because people like me are imaginative and poetic and they want to think about these wild, imaginative things. And so I might structure my appeal based upon who my audience is. So that's ethos, logos, and pathos. And if you go to content and you look in course documents, you'll also see a sheet entitled Rhetorical Techniques, the modus operandi for wow, what I call wildly original writing. So if I ever put a wow by your paper, you'll be like, wow, that must have been good. And so I give you some examples of techniques that writers use to create rhetoric, effective communication, right? And these are just some. There are many beyond this, but read through this and it will be helpful to you in understanding how writers use these techniques. So now if you go back to course documents, and you may have to scroll down and hit load more. They're in alphabetical order, and you usually won't see all of them right off the bat. You'll see another reading for this week. What is a summary response, also called a summary and paraphrase essay, and how should I organize it? So this very first major paper that you'll write in 1010 is a summary and response. And the paper one assignment sheet, which is a separate sheet from this summary of what is a summary, will give you specific details about that paper, and that's one of the readings for next time around. But this sheet introduces you to the concept of summary and response and helps you understand how to best organize your paper. So essentially this is one paper, but it has two parts to it. It has the summary part and it has the response part. So one continuous essay with two parts. And then this sheet that you'll read tells you about two traditional ways to sort of organize a summary and response essay. And then it gives you steps of how to actually begin writing. And it gives you a sample summary format there. And so it's an important little piece there for you to read. So that's just a quick overview of some of the readings for, or really all of the readings for week 1. Thanks for hanging in there with me, and I'll see you soon.